Thank you, Mayor Darcy Byrne. My task here is to really give you an overview of the proposal and give you some factual information about what's being proposed by the applicant. I also want to talk a bit about how it relates to the Sydenham to Bankstown Urban Renewal Corridor, because obviously this actually forms part of that strategy, and we have held a public meeting, numerous public meetings in relation to that development. What we'll be doing is raising some of the key issues, some of the key concerns, and also I'll talk you through a bit about the process and let you know what's going to happen from here. So just to orient yourself, this is the site in Carrington Road. It's a very large site. It's actually 7.8 hectares in size, and it's currently industrial land, and it's bordered by Carrington Road, and it's got the railway at the back. What I think is important to note about this site, it is actually quite constrained in the sense that it does have the railway lines, it does have a very constrained road network around there. There's quite small roads, and you obviously have railway bridges going over railway lines. You've got the Cooks River. It is actually a constrained site. Just in a little bit more detail, it is one of the largest sites, and it's the largest planning proposal that we've seen at the Inner West Council. You'll notice that that's largely currently industrial, but also there's industrial businesses all along the western side. So on the western side of Carrington Road is also industrial. Now, just to give you an outline of the proposal, you'll see that they're proposing essentially to rezone this site from general industrial to R4 high density residential and B2 local centre. So there's an increase of the floor space ratio, you can see 0.95 to 3.5, and I think you don't need to know a lot about planning to realise that's a very significant increase in floor space ratio. The building heights from 25 metres, 50 metres and up to 105 metres. Now 105 metres is a tall building that is capable, depending on what you build there, but if it's residential, is roughly up to 35 stories. And for the sake of comparison, you imagine the Wallay Creek buildings across the way, they go up to about 22, I think 24 stories max. So it's significantly taller than Wallay Creek just across the Cooks River. The proposal is for 2,616 units in 19 buildings, and in a development of this sort, you're looking at around 6,000 people. There's a proposal for 7,000 square metres of retail and 10,200 square metres of commercial, and that does include a supermarket. So in this slide, this gives you the floor plate at ground level, and just to sort of set the scene, those things in blue are retail and commercial. So you can see essentially the development along Carrington Road is retail, commercial, and all those in the salmony pink colour is essentially the high density residential. And if you can just keep perspective, the residential is slated to form about 231,000 square metres of residential. And as I said, 7,000 square metres of retail, 10,000 square metres of commercial, and industrial is 0 square metres. So this is what it looks like. So you can see they're seeking a range of buildings. That's the 105 metre square buildings on the right of the screen that you can see. You can see the General Motors Heritage Building in the front. So that's being retained, but then there's these residential buildings, commercial retail buildings along here, and high density residential there. So this is looking at the development from the west. So if you imagine you're looking west of Carrington Road. So what you'll notice there, obviously incredibly bulky visual impact. What we've put in there is actually, you can see that on the west side of Carrington Road, we've essentially put the, block diagrams of what it would look like if that industrial is built out according to the Sydenham to Bankstown renewal strategy, because in that strategy, that's actually slated to be built out. So you would end up with this high density here, but also this high density here, up to 8 stories along there. So just to give you a sense of what's proposed in terms of the public domain, the applicant has said that they are providing some public domain. You can see there is some green space there. So we've got wetlands and creek along the railway line, and you've got this park there. Now that actually, according to the applicant, forms 21% of the site, and 27% of the site is paved open space. So that's actually linking roads, paved areas. The proponent has identified opportunities for connections with cycleways and underpasses linking the site to other destinations, particularly the railway station, but there's no model in there to pay for it, and there's no suggestion that they're willing to actually fund those sorts of connections. So in order to make that work, there would be a lot of investment needed to actually fund various connections. Those sorts of things will be dealt with in a voluntary planning agreement. As it stands at the moment, there is no voluntary planning agreement with this proposal whatsoever, which is a key issue, because the only way that you can actually have a discussion with any applicant is to actually have a voluntary planning agreement, which essentially captures some of the value to actually reinvest in infrastructure and affordable housing. But with this, there is none. We do have a letter from the applicant saying that, which we only received in the last couple of days, suggesting they are willing to start looking at a voluntary planning agreement, but it certainly doesn't form part of the proposal. Now, just to put it in context of the Sydenham to Bankstown Urban Renewal Corridor. So there's Carrington Road going up to, and that's Marrickville Station up there. And you can see there, that's the 8-storey we're talking about. That's high density residential at 8 stories. High density, all the red is high density, with up 12 stories there on the corner there. It's supposed to be a station rebuild entrance around that side of the station. So the point I want to make here about the Sydenham to Bankstown renewal strategy, even in the Department of Planning's own renewal strategy, they have said that this Carrington Road site is only 8 stories, high density at 8 stories. They do specify that there should be detailed master planning to establish the height and built form in this precinct, so that should take place first. They do talk about the need for open space and enhanced connections to existing neighbourhood. And they do actually talk about the retention of employment uses on the site. In other words, they address the issue of industrial lands and employment lands and the need to do that. So there will be an opportunity for questions and statements later in the session, but I think it's fair to say that this proposal does not conform to the Sydenham to Bankstown, even the department's own strategy document on urban renewal. It does not conform to that. So what I'll do is I'll just lead you through some of the issues that even in this preliminary stage the council officers have identified as some of the really the key problems with this site. One of the really big issues is the loss of employment lands. This is a really big issue for all of the inner west, and council's been going through essentially dealing with this issue with every planning proposal and development that comes in. How do we manage this issue of employment and ensure that we retain a diversity of employment within the inner west? There's a diversity of industrial and manufacturing employment versus commercial and retail. So that is a key issue, and the Made in Marrickville study, which was conducted by the University of Wollongong, found that on this site there's 148 existing businesses and that there's 1,440 existing jobs. Now, when you put that against the proposal, there is a net loss of 544 jobs, and I think the concern from the officer's point of view is that the jobs that are being replaced on the site essentially is moving all of the creative manufacturing industry style jobs from the site and replacing them with retail or commercial, which is a completely different use. Now, the thing about this site, and for those who may not be aware, this site currently has a lot of businesses on site who work in the creative industries. They actually build props and provide creative stuff for Vivid Festival, the Gay and Lesbian Mardi Gras. There's numerous award winners on the site, winning awards for all sorts of creative pursuits. Essentially, this site really is one of the key parts of the fabric of Sydney as a global city. This actually is a key attractor. It actually supports the various events and cultural activities in Sydney that actually makes Sydney such a desirable place to live and also a great place to visit. So we would see this as a great loss to both the inner west and to Sydney as a global city if there was a loss of these creative industries. And the other big issue about the jobs is that the rezoning is asking for this to be rezoned as a local centre, including an on-site supermarket. Now, this really could have significant impact on the employment and the economic development of surrounding villages and town centres, as the Mayor mentioned, particularly Marrickville Road. It is not a good idea to actually sort of allow, higgledy-piggledy economic development in various industrial sites or former industrial sites. It's much better to plan things well. It's much better to ensure that you actually protect those places that work incredibly well, like Marrickville Road, and we would not be supporting having this as a local centre. So another key issue is traffic. Obviously, anyone who lives down there knows that the traffic around that area is really bad at the moment. The words I have, and having spoken to many people who live around there, is it's at gridlock now. There's lots of problems, particularly in the connections to Unwin's Bridge Road and going back to Marrickville Station. The proposed on-site parking is for 3,400 vehicles. So you can imagine you're bringing 3,400 vehicles on site. Even if there was some sort of reduction, some sort of innovative car parking scheme, the addition of 3,400 vehicles to that traffic network would essentially put in gridlock. The RMS themselves have actually recognised this. They recommend that this proposal be deferred until such time as the Sydenham to Bankstown precinct has a proper impact assessment and it's fully finalised, and that there's a proper funding delivery mechanism for essentially all the traffic upgrades that would have to be built. So they themselves have said this should be deferred. So other key issues around amenity impacts and affordable housing. Obviously, the bulk and scale of this is way out of character with the area. This is way out of character with South Marrickville. It doesn't even conform to Walleye Creek across the way. It's just way out of character with anything. So this really would be what I would consider an ambit claim. There is a lack of open space. Despite the fact there is some open space, there really is not enough on the site. There's inadequate design and master planning. There isn't enough detail in the proposal to actually make an assessment of whether this actually meets the needs of the local community. And as we said before, there's actually no VPA, which means there's no offer for affordable housing in this. So the Inner West Council has adopted a policy of ensuring that all developments like this should have 15% of the stock as affordable housing. For this particular development, that would mean they would have to be offering 392 dwellings. At the moment, they have offered none. There are some other issues there. Obviously, this is a site that's affected by flooding. You've got the Cooks River, and there's ongoing issues with drainage and flooding on the site. There's impacts of heritage significance. There are obviously some very significant heritage buildings, and the treatment of those has to be examined. And there's clear land use conflicts between residents and industrial uses, and how you would actually manage having so many, essentially the equivalent of a small suburb as part of what was an industrial area. And probably can't be managed. So they're the key issues, and obviously there'll be more work has to be done, but I'll just give you a bit of a summary of the planning proposal process. It should be noted, and for those who sort of aren't enmeshed in the New South Wales planning process, This is a planning proposal, not a DA. What this is it's actually an application to rezone the land. Once the land is rezoned, then the landowners can put in development applications to build according to the new rules that have been rezoned. Now, because it's a rezoning of the land, the proposal essentially requires this delicate dance between council and the Department of Planning. So whilst council has to make a recommendation about what it thinks about this, the problem the council has, and we have this with all the planning proposals, is that if we oppose things outright and actually are too oppositional, the developer actually has the right to go directly to the department and bypass council, and then council loses all control of what happens on the site. This has happened on other occasions and can lead to a very negative outcome, because then the developer deals directly with the Department of Planning. So what will happen from here is that council received this proposal in May 2017. Council has been preparing its response. It actually sent a response letter back to the applicant, which is Mirvac, with outlining all of these issues. At the moment, the ball's in Mirvac's court to actually respond to that and come back to council. Now, once they do respond to council, the officers will have to assess that and actually provide a report to council, and the elected councils will have to make a decision about how they go forward with this. And this is the very difficult part about how we deal with this. And then that recommendation will be either outright refusal or recommend that it goes to the Department of Planning in some modified form. So that's the basic outline of what's planned for this planning proposal. As you can see, there clearly are a lot of issues that affect the local community. Council clearly has expressed serious concerns to the applicant, which we wait to see how they address it. And the only way forward is if the point of this meeting really is to actually ensure that the public is fully informed about what's proposed, and that the public can have its voice heard as part of this process. Thank you.